Hello, everyone. Welcome to Esri Press Interviews. I'm Stacy Krieg, and I'm an acquisitions editor at Esri Press. And today we have Kristen Kurland with us, along with Will Gore. She's the co-author of 4 books for Esri: GIS tutorial for ArcGIS Pro, GIS tutorial for ArcGIS Desktop, ArcGIS for Health, and Crime Analysis for ArcGIS Pro. So she's one of our most prolific authors. We're thrilled to have her. Thank you for joining us today, Kristen.
Well, thank you for having me, Stacy.
Great. And I know you put together a presentation, so
Yeah.
I'm going to turn that over to you.
One of the reasons why I wanted to share a little bit was because my co-author, Will Gore, couldn't be here today. So I want to talk a little bit about him, and I want to talk a little bit about how we came about using GIS, and then we can have some more questions afterward. So let me start by telling a little bit about Will Gore. Will is a professor of public policy and information systems emeritus, which obviously means that he recently stepped down from the faculty here at the Heinz College at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. Just a little bit of a background about Will. He joined the Heinz College faculty in 1985. And for 10 years until he became emeritus, the 10 years prior, he served as the faculty chair for our Master of Science and in Public Master of Science in Public Policy and Management at CMU in Heinz College. And he was also chair of the Faculty Oversight Committee for the program in our Washington, D.C. campus. Will's research obviously includes GIS, predictive models, and management science models as applied to public sector problems. So he's done a lot of work in cities and with different police departments. His current research includes developing crime prevention programs for law enforcement. He does prediction of rare events over time and space, and information systems for support of policy and planning in organizations. And Will is highly published. His publications have appeared in Management Science, Geographical Analysis, the International Journal of Forecasting, Criminology, the Journal of Quantitative Criminology, MIS Quarterly, and a lot of other leading journals. And he received funding. He's received a lot of funding from the National Institute of Justice, the Centers for Disease Control, the National Science Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and other organizations. And I'm proud to say that in addition, Will has won a lot of awards. He's twice, which is unheard of, won the Marcia Wade Teaching Award at the Heinz College. In 2005, he was inducted as a fellow of the International Institute of Forecasters. He was the past editor of International Journal of Forecasting and the recipient of the Best Paper Award for the American Information Systems Society in 2001. So you can see why Will is truly an expert in looking at GIS as applied to his field of study. So a little bit about me. I'm a teaching professor of architecture, information systems, and public policy at Carnegie Mellon. I joined CMU in 1994 as an adjunct professor, and I accepted a full-time position in 1999. In addition to my academic appointments in architecture at the Heinz College, I also have a courtesy appointment in civil and environmental engineering at CMU. And I recently served as the president of our Andrew Carnegie Society, which is our donor society. And as its president, I was also a university trustee. So I spent a lot of time looking at the strategic plans of Carnegie Mellon and at the high level administration. I am a big believer in philanthropy, and I also currently serve as one of 3 community members on a distribution committee for a local foundation, the McCune Foundation. Most of my research is interdisciplinary collaborations looking at health, the built environment, obviously geospatial analysis, and 3D data visualization using a number of different tools. I work really closely with my colleagues and students on projects that address equity, health, urban design, economic development, sustainability, and smart cities. In addition to my teaching GIS, I also teach Revit, Autodesk Revit, advanced CAD, 2D and 3D. I have a lengthy experience in computer-aided facility management. My background is architecture, and what a lot of people don't know is for many years I worked in the corporate world I actually had a top secret clearance for government. My clients included the CIA, the National Geospatial Agency, and so I have a big work background. And in particular, getting back to health, I work a lot with physician executives, medical residents, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And also, I've been teaching via distance for many years. So a lot of my colleagues are coming into the world of remote teaching, and I've been doing that since 1999. I've also won a few awards. I'm not going to go on about these, but I am proud to say that I was just named the Women of Spirit for a lot of the work I do in the community. Also the Teaching Award in corporations. I was an outstanding educator for ArcGIS, which is a facility management company. And with Esri, I was awarded the Health Communications Award in 2012 and a special achievement work for the work that I have done with the Legal Aid Society in California back in 2004. So that's a little bit about Will and me personally. By the way, if anybody hasn't read the Women in GIS series of books, you can read more about me in the first series and a lot of other interesting women that are doing things in GIS. So thanks, Esri Press, for that. I want to talk a little bit. Will and I, Will helped me pull this presentation together, by the way, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the history of GIS at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, because I think it's quite interesting. If you're not familiar with Carnegie Mellon, this is a picture of CMU's campus with the University of Pittsburgh in the background, and you can see UPMC, the hospitals in the background as well. We have 7 colleges at CMU. You see I'm appointed in 3 of them. In addition to research, we also obviously focus on education, but I put on the slide interdisciplinary collaboration, because I think that's very important to understand where Will and I are coming from in the projects that we work on. It's not just our research. We look at this from a perspective of many different units on campus. So back to how do we get involved in GIS? I think it's always interesting for schools and universities to say, what really got you started in this world? And ours goes the whole way back to 1982. And Dean Brian Berry was the dean. He came to CMU to become the dean of our school, our college. At the time, it was the School of Urban and Public Affairs. We call it SUPA. That now became the Heinz College. It was named after the late Senator John Heinz. And Brian Berry came from Harvard, where Jack Dangerman worked. He was the director of the Laboratory for Computer Graphics and Spatial Analysis at Harvard. And when he came to CMU to become the dean of our School of Urban and Public Affairs, he brought with him Odyssey, the first integrated GIS software. And shortly after that, Will joined the faculty. So Will has been at CMU, as I said, since 1985. He joined as a professor, and he was introduced to GIS by Brian Berry and also colleague Dr. Frank Wimberly, who was working with the IT components of the GIS. So around the same time, in the late 1980s, Paul Farmer, who I have recently reconnected with at the Geodesign conferences in Redlands, established GIS in the city of Pittsburgh and the regional and planning department. And back then they were using ArcInfo. At the same time, Will established a GIS lab at SUPA using ArcInfo, and he was conducting student projects with city planning. And what he was doing was automating the process of evaluating zoning variances and including notifications for zoning meetings to landowners nearby. And so if you think about this, this was fairly innovative in the late 1980s to not only just be mapping, but to be using these techniques for notifications and things of that sort. And from there, Will just started teaching a GIS class, and he started writing his own tutorials, obviously, because there really weren't any materials for learning GIS. So then came the 25th anniversary of SUPA, and that happened in 1994. And Will was sitting at a meeting, or one of the celebration ceremonies, I should say, with the mayor of Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania. And Wilkinsburg was one of the poorest performing school districts in the state. And she looked at Will and said, "You should do something about this. You faculty at Carnegie Mellon should do something about the state of this neighborhood." And they started talking, and there was a program that was a precedence for this, I think in the Washington, D.C. area, which was a summer-long program. And we established something called InfoLink. And InfoLink was a summer-long program that brought students to our campus. We taught in the high schools, brought them to the campus. And then we got them internships, and it really encouraged them to look at technology and higher education as an option. And that's when Will recruited me. So I came to teach CAD in InfoLink, and this was a program that lasted 9 years. And it's one of the things that Will and I are most proud of our time at CMU, was helping these young high school students from disadvantaged neighborhoods. So around that time too, once Will recruited me to teach that class, he then recruited me to teach more, and then I eventually became faculty at CMU. And where we are today at CMU, we have students that we're teaching worldwide. And so we have campuses, we have official classes in our campuses in Doha, Qatar. We have campuses, I'm teaching right now, a bunch of students from our Adelaide, Australia campus. It's not just me now, obviously Will is retired, but there are 5 faculty that are teaching GIS in various courses across campus, and we have 2 GIS librarians that are actively using and teaching GIS. So that's just a little bit of a history. Let me jump into some of the information about teaching experience. So this is just some of our students at CMU. They come from multiple disciplines, from all 7 colleges and all of our campuses. The picture on the left is myself with one of our students that was from the Adelaide campus. He's originally from Pakistan, but when it was attending our Adelaide campus, and he was visiting me in Pittsburgh. The photo on the right is 2 of our first graduate students from the InfoLink program at CMU, and that's Will and myself with them. But what I think is interesting is that we have so many multiple disciplines that we're teaching. And at Carnegie Mellon, we don't have a GIS degree, we don't have a GIS program, but GIS is embedded in everything we teach. And so what we really do at CMU is we use it as a tool for architecture, business, computer science, engineering, healthcare, information systems, robotics, public policy. And so our experience has gone obviously from the high school level with students in InfoLink, the whole way through undergraduate, master's, PhD students, and also into the field of medicine, where many of my students are medical residents, medical students, and physician executives from our Master's in Medical Management program. So we draw upon all of that, and at CMU, just the experience collectively, this was just a low estimate. We've had over 150 sections of GIS with more than 5,000 students over the past 30 years that Will and I have been teaching GIS, and these are just some photographs of some of my students that have graduated through the programs. They include engineering, architecture students, these physicians. The students in the group picture are our Master of Urban Design students. And so again, this is how Will and I pull together the work that we do. So the way that we do it is with a lecture and a lab approach. We're firm believers in don't just press buttons on a computer. You really have to understand the concepts behind what you're learning. So we believe that the lectures are providing the information about the concepts of map design and databases and geocoding and whatever the topic might be. And so it's learning, how do we start to look at selecting the scales for a project? How do we look at the data at a whole? How do we evaluate and interpret histograms? What kind of elements do we want to be looking at? Then I have to say that a lot of what we're doing now, we have our lectures, but I'm so excited that Esri has the Learn lessons, because much of what I do is being complemented by the MOOCs. The cartography MOOC is one of my favorites, the Learn lessons. And so what we're doing is we're providing lectures that are structured within our courses and our books, but I'm supplementing more and more of that with what Esri is doing with the tools that they're developing. The other thing that we think is very important is a lab session. And so the labs are what provides the students the opportunity to work through the tutorial workbooks, work on homeworks, work on assignments, ask questions, have interactions with us. This is one of the labs at CMU, and this is a photograph of Will with some of his students in a computer lab. And a lot of times people say to me, that's interesting, but what do we do now when we're in a situation where many of us are teaching online? And I can answer more about that, but I've been teaching online for a long time, and it's just a different way of interacting with the students. And in some ways, some of the remote ways to help a student look at a problem is sometimes even easier, because we can see it right on the computer. But there does have to be that component where you're not just learning the concepts, obviously, but the hands-on with the software. So the other thing that we think is really important is that our GIS courses include some kind of a capstone project. And I've actually been on the phone this morning with a number of students talking about projects for their summer course that they're taking with me. And the projects are really designed for the students to get into something they're interested in. This is an example of a story map. In the last few years, I've been exclusively using ArcGIS Pro and ArcGIS Online and story maps. And this is a project from some students in the School of Architecture looking at an analysis of urban stormwater for constructed wetlands and rain gardens. And you can see they have their methodology and all of that laid out, but they've also developed this into a nice interactive story map. The other thing that I'm finding is that a lot of students now are interested in dashboards, operations management. And so Will and I developed 2 chapters in our latest version of ArcGIS Pro to look at operations management and networking using the dashboards, the collector apps. And so I'm proud to say that a lot of the students are starting to develop some nice projects around that. And this one is looking at real estate market in Pittsburgh. So just to pivot a little bit, the books with Esri Press, as you mentioned, Stacy, we have 4 books. Before we came to Esri Press, though, Will and I were developing these tutorials on our own. And in 1995, the reason we decided to publish them, we were just happy using our own tutorials. But 2 of our former PhD students, John Gant and George Tita, asked us if they could use our tutorials because they were going to be teaching GISs in their institutions where they were moving to. And so they said, come on, why don't you do this? You've developed these really lengthy tutorials. Why don't you self-publish it? So for a few years, we self-published our tutorials. And then we also wrote texts for course technology and then obviously for Esri Press. And that came about in 1999 when I met my very good friend, Christian Harder, who at the time was the manager of Esri Press. And we met at the user conference there in 1999. And you might get to know Christian because he's also an Esri Press author. But basically, as the manager, he hired us away from course technologies and said, come write books for us. And so we've been writing for Esri Press ever since then. And just the timeline of our first editions of the books that we have been writing, the tutorial series, which evolved into the Pro series, was in the early 2000s. Mid 2000s, around 2005 or 6, we did our health book, and then that followed with the crime book. And so just to let you know where we are today with these books, the Pro book is going to be released for the version 2.6 this summer. There is an interim ebook out right now for the 2.4 version of Pro. We've revised the chapters, obviously, for the major changes that have been happening over the last few years, updates to the ArcGIS Online, the story maps, the census data, the dashboards. And so I'm pleased to say that the new Pro version will be available this fall for folks that are teaching, and the print book will be available. But we haven't forgotten the desktop. So our desktop is going to be getting a new edition. The 6th edition is the latest one, and we're going to be coming out with a new edition this summer of 2020. And things haven't changed too much with that software, so hopefully that will be status quo for a little while. The health book, the last edition was the 5th edition, and we have not decided to update this for the Pro version. But instead, what I'm doing is I'm having people move over to our Pro book. And what I have done, though, is I've taken all of our assignments, all of our lectures, and I've matched them now with the Pro book. So if anybody's interested in teaching health, just get a hold of me, and I'll give you a link to all of the materials that are related to health, because I actually myself teach a health course. And then the crime book, that's Will's baby. And so right now we had an edition that was in 2018, and that's also for desktop, and that's where it's going to remain from now, and we'll see what the future brings for that book. So just to wrap this up, the learning methods, the book, we use these concepts at the start of the tutorials. They're separated from the steps on the computer. We do have step-by-step instructions for everything that we're teaching. We try and keep our steps short chunks, 10 or fewer steps. We try and make it so if you need to take a break, you can stop here and come back to the book. We think that there's a great need for reinforcement of what you're learning. So we have developed something called Your Turn, and that allows users to just practice what they learned in the previous few steps, or in some cases, a Your Turn is required to go on. But that's just a way to reinforce what you're learning. And then we also provide these end of chapter assignments that are more challenging. It integrates what you've learned in the whole chapter. We also have teacher resources for lectures, notes, videos. As I said, I've been teaching GIS online since 1999. I've developed a robust video lectures for everything that we teach. And so that's been available. People keep downloading that daily. It's available for anybody to download. So not only teachers, but self-learners can download those videos as well. And then also all of the grading materials. So we're trying to make it as easy as we can on people that want to teach using our books. And so with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen. So Stacy, we can get back and you can ask me more questions.
Thank you, Kristen. That was really great information. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's really fascinating to learn how all the disciplines and the people really interconnect in the GIS world. So thank you for sharing that. We do have some really interesting questions that came over GeoNet from our readers. So if you don't mind, let's get into those.
Sure.
Okay, so the first one is, what drew you personally to GIS?
That's a good question. Yeah, so I gave you the history of how it came at CMU and how I came to CMU. So for me, I think it goes back to my work. So I was doing this work and I had my own company. And so I was doing all of this consulting in the world of graphics and data. And so mine was more started with CAD, then it moved into this computer-aided facility management. And so I've always been fascinated by this. And, background, just a quick history about my education. I was a chemistry major to start, moved into architecture, but that was in the mid 80s. And it wasn't robust teaching those kinds of things in the university. And I found that if I had to go back, I think I would have been a computer scientist or a data analyst if I were to go back to school, or if I had started over again, because that's really where my heart is. But I also found that I am an artist. And so I was really drawn to GIS because it satisfied all of that. It was, and CAD is great, but it's, it's drawing lines and it's, putting structures together. And GIS brought both of those worlds in for me. So it was the data and the advanced analytics, but the artistic side of it. And I love when Esri always talks about the art and the science, and that's what drew me to GIS.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's really interesting. So someone wants to know, as the co-author, you and Will co-authored these numerous books, what advice would you give to someone who's interested in writing a book on GIS, or any book for that matter?
Okay. Well, my first bit of advice, I think, would be prepared to spend some time on this because it is a big undertaking. And, Will and I, we've been writing these books now for 26 years together. And I often say, I equate it to, Will and I have never had an argument. I say that, Elton John and Bernie Taupin, his, songwriter that he works with, never had an argument. I never had an argument with Will because we're both very patient. And, it's funny because I said to Will, we're both professors, and what we do is we come home and we write our books in the evenings and on the weekends, and it's a lot of time. And I said to Will, I said, you realize that we have two jobs. He said, yeah, well, when were you going to realize that? But they are almost full-time jobs. And when we're in the throes of writing our books, it takes a lot of time and a lot of attention to detail, I think, as well. But the other thing that Will and I have found is that our student feedback is invaluable. And for us writing academic books, we really take to heart, the things that students experience, their feedback on what works, what doesn't work. And also you can see that our books are not just like pulled out of thin air. These are real projects that we work on. When I wrote the health book, I actually dedicated a year of my life doing those projects so I could understand the process of what was happening with those projects that I brought into the book. So I think that it's not just writing a book, it's drawing from all of your experiences that's really critical.
Yeah, I would agree. I know that you and Will are both so dedicated to your students, and you're always looking to update things. And one of the things that always kind of made me laugh is that you said you give extra points to your students when they find something wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're always disappointed when we've just done an edition and we're pretty sure there aren't any errors. Because actually, I had a student today find an error in one of my assignments, so I have to give him a bonus point for that. It was the
That's
census, though.
awesome.
The census renamed their file, so I'm going to blame it on them. But I love the census, so I can't really blame anything on them.
So that actually kind of leads to the next question. What do you find that students struggle the most with in class, especially with GIS Pro, all that kind of changes, things like that?
Yeah, I think that, and this has been consistent over time. One of the things that I've seen that they struggle the most with is these like large, complex data sets and the sort of the structure of the software. So, but Esri has been correcting that. So, in the old days, the paths had to be just so, and it was very complicated. Now with geodatabases and file geodatabases, they've corrected a lot of that. But I think that's part of it, is where is the data? If anybody who's taught GIS, and I've probably every person that has taught this or used it sees the red explanation point in your projects. Where did my data go? Why is it not there? So understanding, I think the organization of the file system is a big one. But I'm confident that, in the future, all of that will be addressed and Esri will fix all of that. And it's not an Esri problem, it's just a data management problem. So I think managing large data sets is probably the biggest challenge that I see. And just being organized. You've got to be organized. It takes discipline, but you got to be.
All right, great. Well, what advice would you give students that are new to ArcGIS Pro? It sounds like getting organized is probably one of your biggest advice, and a lot of students could use that advice. But is there anything specific other than what you mentioned you would let people know?
Yeah, I think that it's easy if you're using our books. You have to read the materials. You have to look at the lectures. I keep emphasizing this to students. I said, you're not in this class to just push buttons. I said, if that's all you wanted to do, just buy the book and go. You want to really understand the concepts. And I think a lot of times, and I do the same, when I'm doing things, my husband always says, why don't you read the manual before you put that thing together? Like, no, I can just jump in and put it together. But I think the thing that you have to do is take the time to read conceptually of what's happening. Understand, why am I doing this process? And that's what we have in the conceptual parts of the book, and that's what we have in the lectures. And then it also takes time to go through and do the steps in the tutorials, because if you try and cut corners, you're going to miss something. And so I think what advice I would give to anybody learning the software is to don't try and just jump in and cut corners. It's not like a simple piece of software that you can just pick up and intuitively know. You have to go through all of those learn lessons. You have to go through all of those things to truly learn, what's happening within the software and apply it. That's the success. Don't cut corners.
Okay, thank you. I'll people take that advice.
No, you don't cut corners, though.
So what advice would you give to educators specifically that are teaching with your books now?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I would say that alternating these lectures with the labs, and I've been experimenting with this over the last few years. And what I found is that I would try and intersperse some of the lectures in with the labs. Doing the demos is very important with the students. Showing them what to do. So have the conceptual lectures. But then at some point you may want to show them, here's the stumbling point. And I try and do that with my students. I try and show them, hey, here's where you're going to run into a problem. We've been doing this for years. The educators have been doing this. They're the experts. Show the students where you're going to run into those problems, both with the the tutorials and the homework assignments. I also encourage my students to work through the tutorials on your own and come into the labs ready to ask questions. And I think that's a big thing that I've been trying to promote recently, and that really helps, because they can spend the time with us, to take the valuable time with your teaching assistants and your professors to use that time to ask them questions. So that's what I would say for instructors. Encourage students to work through things ahead of time and try and utilize the time with you as best you can.
That's great advice. So to wrap up, if you wanted readers to take away one thing from your books, what would that be?
Wow, one thing from our books. I think one thing that I would want students to understand is that GIS, it's complex and it's interdisciplinary, and no matter what problem you're looking at, what decision making you're using GIS for, what you're trying to do with it, you have to realize that it fits into a bigger picture, and that GIS is a component of this, and GIS in itself needs to have multiple things addressed to it. So you see, even with health, when you look at my health research, it's not only just health, it's economics, it's the built environment, it's everything that goes into it. So I think that people need to realize that it's not just a narrowly focused problem. And that's one of the things that we hope to do in our books, is to give everybody a sprinkling of what it's all about. And so, that's what makes us, love the writing of our books. We're always discovering new problems, and I think that that's what keeps us going.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to thank our author, Kristen Kurland, for taking your time to talk to us. I really appreciate it. And I want to tell everybody that's watching that take a look at the Esri merchandise store or on select online retailers and pick up one of the 4 books that Will and Kristen have wrote for Esri Press. Again, thanks, Kristen.
Well, thank you.
I really appreciate it. It's a
Yeah.
pleasure to work with you. And thanks for everybody for watching. Have a safe and happy rest of your week.
And can I just say thank you, Stacy, and everybody at Esri Press, because it wouldn't just be Will and me. I want to thank the book designers, everybody who tests all of our materials, and you and everybody that helps us pull it all together. So it's a pleasure working with everybody at Esri Press, and we look forward to many more years of collaborations. And see everybody at the virtual UC.
Yeah, well, yes, we love working with you too.
Yeah.
And yes, we'll see everyone at the virtual UC.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.